Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10 and support the channel at the same time. Hey there, it's John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to part 6 of our 6-part Rivals of Ixalan full set review. And we are at the end of this set, so we're going to look at all of the multicolor and colorless cards today. That includes artifacts and lands. And we're going to be wrapping things up. So if you've been watching this series, you kind of know what to expect here. We're going to look at each card first and foremost through the limited scope. We're going to talk about its utility in draft and sealed, but also when applicable, we'll discuss other formats, Commander, Standard, Modern as well. Now, quickly before we get started though, just a really fast reminder, if you're looking for a way to support what we do here, just check out the description below and you'll see our Patreon page linked. You'll also find some product links on Amazon. If you make any purchases on Amazon, once you go through that link, no matter what it is, we'll get a small percentage. And then finally, Flipside Gaming still offering a promo code for our viewers. You can pick up Rivals there. And it helps us out too when you use that promo code. So it's a win-win. And thank you to everyone who takes a look at that and considers that. But also thank you to everyone who's been sticking with us through this set review, leaving comments, watching, giving us the thumbs up. I appreciate it all around. So thank you all. With that being said, let's get into it. We got a lot of cards to talk about. And the first one is Azure the Lawbringer. Okay, so this is a mythic. Azure is a great limited card. We'll start there. I mean, if you see this in a pack, yeah, I could first pick this. But the only thing that would maybe make me think twice is it is 2 different colors, and it's actually 2 white, 2 blue. That might be hard to swing. It's not really easily splashed into maybe a white something else deck or a blue something else deck. So that alone might make me a little apprehensive. But depending on the pack, I might still go for it anyway, because the power level is pretty high behind this creature. It's a 6/6 flyer, which is nice. And what I do like is when it enters the battlefield, each opponent can't cast instant or sorcery spells during that next turn. So it does kind of protect it. I mean, not completely, because again, we have seen creatures in black that can destroy creatures. So let's say I have one of those, you're still out of luck, but it does maybe at least sort of make it harder to get rid of. So by the time you get back to your turn, maybe you do have one shot to attack in and use that Sphinx's Revelation ability, which is quite good, actually. If you can pull that off, you're probably in a really good place, right? So there's a lot of raw power behind the card for limited purposes. As for Standard, I think this card is a little clunky because first off, 2 blue and 2 white and 2. The casting cost is a little hard to swing. It's not something that is easily pulled off for a lot of decks. Now, control decks could pull off that casting cost, but the big question is, do you want to? Yes, you do get a sizable flyer, but there are some other cards that are better finishers, I think, that are out there that are easier to swing, perhaps. Now, you could say, well, Sphinx's Revelation was built in. Well, the reason Sphinx's Revelation was an amazing card in Standard back in its day was because it was an instant more than anything. So I could play that draw-go style control deck, and then I could simply wait till my opponent has a turn where I don't have to answer anything, and then have a huge Revelation, draw a bunch of cards, gain a bunch of life. That's basically how that deck won. This time around, it's not that flexible. I can only do this when it triggers when this attacks, which means I have a couple options. I either just go for it and put my defenses down, which could not be good, or I'm in a situation where I just do a Revelation, maybe for a little less to keep some of my defenses up. And those aren't quite as exciting for me, but not necessarily horrible either. Could this come out of the sideboard in a control build in a, say, mirror match? Yeah, it could probably. I feel like that's where this maybe would be the best. So maybe it sees play in that capacity only in Standard, I think, but other than that, though, it is a good limited card. And in Commander, I think I could have some fun with this. Again, it is still fragile in a Commander game because it doesn't have hexproof or anything like that. And it's going to have a target on its back considering that Sphinx's Revelation ability. But it does slow your opponents down at least a little bit because they can't do anything on their next turn as far as sorceries or instants are concerned. So that's interesting. Not to say they can't just blow it up with an instant removal spell when your turn comes back around or something like that. Or before your turn ends, but still, just something to think about there. Resplendent Griffin. Okay, this is just a real simple card, 3 casting cost, 2/2 flyer. That alone makes me say, yeah, I'd be interested in this in draft or sealed, basically. These cards are good. It is a little annoying that it's 2 different colors, but if I'm in those colors, then yeah, it's probably just fine for me. Now, it also has this Ascend ability, so if you can get to Ascend later in the game, this card becomes a little bit better. It is an attack trigger, so when you do have Ascend, you will be able to just attack in as a 3/3, basically. And if your opponent doesn't have an answer at that point, this could snowball on them. So this is a card that's good early. It's good a little bit later, assuming you can get the City's Blessing. And yeah, I'd be happy to play it if I'm in those colors. Elenda the Dusk Rose. Okay, the card itself is actually phenomenal. The problem is casting cost versus power toughness here. It is extremely fragile, and you have to pay 2 different colors to get this thing out. Now, if you can get it rolling, it's amazing. And that's the thing, especially in a vampire deck. It's incredible. A couple things I want to point out. First off, it's a 1/1 when it comes into play. If it does die, you at least get a 1/1 vampire lifelink token out of it. That's not great. It's kind of like, you got some sort of value for the 4 you paid instead of just getting completely hosed, but still, it's almost like getting completely hosed. Also, too, if you can buff this even once, now you get 2 tokens, buff it twice, 3 tokens. So it gets better the more you can do with it. But what I don't like is this environment has a lot of enrage enablers, which ping stuff. And you might just get hit simply through collateral damage. Like, you could sit down in game 1, play this thing, and your opponent's on some sort of enraged dinosaur plane, and they're like, oh, ping that, right? Instead of their dinosaur. So that is problematic at best, right? So now, with that being said, if she can survive, she's amazing, because as creatures start dying, she gets bigger. When she finally does die, not get exiled, but when she does finally die, you get all these tokens, helps you towards ascend, lets you go wide in the vampire deck. She's got lifelink to turn on some of the vampire deck abilities. Like, she does everything you want in that vampire build, but the fragility is such a huge problem. So with that being said, do you play her? Yes, if I'm in the vampire build, I'm still going to play her. I'm going to take the risk. I'm going to try to protect her to the best of my ability. Sometimes it'll work out, sometimes it won't. Draft, she could still be a high draft pick. Probably not a first pick for me. Again, she is dual color. That's an issue. But also, I'm not going to pick her up unless I'm for sure really in the vampire build. If I'm not, I don't really think she's doing quite enough, and I think the fragility is going to talk me out of it at least a lot of the time. In draft sealed, I'd probably just play her because I think she has a better chance of maybe surviving and having a decent payoff for me just regardless. So she's probably okay there. Draft's a little more hesitant depending on what my build is. What about standard is the big question, because we do think there will be a vampire deck that's competitive. There already was a competitive vampire deck, but I think it's going to be even more competitive. Does she get in there? Again, the fragility and the fact that she's legendary, I think holds her back. I just think there's more efficient plays you could be doing in that deck, because there's some great vampires. We're going to see a really amazing one in just a second here, actually. So I do think that could be a problem. I mean, I'd want to test it out. Maybe you can find ways to protect her a little bit. And if that's the case, wonderful. But I just don't think her ability is also going to move fast enough for you in standard necessarily to have the impact you want it to have, considering the casting cost. And again, that 1/1 power toughness. So I don't really see that. But commander, maybe. Again, I'm not using her as my commander probably necessarily. But she could be a card that complements a vampire strategy there for sure. Legion Lieutenant. Okay, this card is fantastic. So first off, draft and sealed. Do you play this thing? Yeah, you know what? It's a 2/2 for 2. Granted, it is 2 different colors, so you do have to keep that in mind. It's not always going to be a turn 2 play. Sometimes it might be more like a turn 3 play. But you know what? Even if you have a few vampires in your deck, it doesn't even have to be a lot. It more than makes up for the 2 different color deals. So yeah, you know what? A 2/2 for 2 that's going to buff my other vampires, even if I have just a handful of them or just 1 or 2 others, probably worth my time. Now, aside from that, if I can draft the vampire deck, oh, I'm having a great day here. Basically, this is going to be something that can be extremely powerful in that deck, especially with some of the lifelink tokens and such. And that's kind of awesome. They are uncommon, but they will go fast. I think you will see players, and even if they're not in the vampire deck, like picking these up early on to think there's a chance they might get into the vampire deck. So these aren't going to rotate around the table all that far, basically. You might not feel like you're going to see a lot of them for an uncommon because of that reason, but it's a really fantastic card for a vampire draft build generally. But when you can pick these up like early on in pack 2 or pack 3 and you're already going down the vampire road, you're going to be having a great day. What about standard? Yes. Yes, 100 times yes. This is going to be a huge part of the vampire deck, and really what's going to take that vampire deck from being good to probably great. So we'll have to kind of see how it goes, but definitely this is going to be a key part of it. And even again in Commander, there are a lot of vampire decks out there. It's very popular. We had, of course, the prepackaged deck not too long ago. Got a lot of people thinking about vampires, so this is another good inclusion in that type of deck. Profane Procession, which of course turns into Tomb of the Dusk Rose. Awesome control card, and this is one of the reasons I was kind of saying, you know, Esper control could be a thing, or maybe some of these Azorius control decks start at least splashing a tad bit of black for this, because this is amazing. 3 casting costs, it's not a huge commitment. You put this thing out, and then at instant speed, basically, you exile target creature for 5. So you can do that at the end of your opponent's turn. It's also going to make them think twice about what they can play when they can play it. Additionally, if you have a creature you need to protect, this can help in a pinch, or at least make your opponent think twice about using removal if you have open mana. And then if this does turn, and it does have to turn once it does exile 3 things, so you don't have the choice here. But once it does turn, you can pay 4, tap again, something you can do at instant speed at the end of your opponent's turn to start putting their creatures into play under your control. So those creatures then become your win condition in the control deck. Yeah, that's awesome, right? So limited first, it's great. Again, the only reason I might not 100% say first pick is because of the dual colors, depending on what's going on in the pack. But honestly, if I saw this in pack 1, it would be hard for me to resist it. I think it's that good. And aside from that, I do think this does see standard play, maybe even modern play someday down the road. It just feels really, really interesting, and just feels like it could be a great utility card in those decks that are running a lot of land anyway, right? As long as they're comfortable with the color combination there, I think this card will see a lot of play in the future. Commander 2, it's great there, and you could be stealing some really insane stuff, perhaps, in a game of Commander. Deadeye Brawler. Interesting utility card. Like, this isn't one for standard or anything like that, I don't think, but a 2/4 for 4 with Death Touch, and if you hit Ascend, it gets Curiosity. It's a pirate, so that's kind of good too. What I like about this is pirates are a little more aggro. Having a Death Touch card, even though this does cost 4, it does encourage your opponent sometimes not to block. And then later on, if they don't block, perhaps starting to give you some card advantage. They're going to have to make the decision, though, at some point, and probably get rid of this or block it and lose creatures. But still, it's a good card. It's a strong annoyance on the battlefield for your opponent, if nothing else. Protean Raider. This is a good limited card. Clones are good in limited. This is a clone that's a little bit cheaper, but you do have to pay 2 colors, and you have to use the raid ability to get it to actually clone. Other than that, it's a 2/2. So there's a lot of awkwardness around this card, but I don't think raid will be too hard to turn on in the right deck. I mean, we're about to see a card that's a great raid enabler, and there's a lot of them out there for both pirates and merfolk. A lot of small flyers. Merfolk have some unblockable abilities. So a lot of ways to turn this on. And you know what? You just copy the best thing on the battlefield when you can pull it off. That's actually pretty good for the mana you're pouring into this. So yeah, I like it. In a pinch, it's still a 2/2 for 3. So it's not awesome, but at least it isn't a dead card either if there's no targets on the battlefield. Sometimes that will be relevant. Standard, clones aren't usually all that great in standard because they're so dependent on board state. And this one especially, having to jump through hoops to make it work, you're not going to want to play this there. But it's okay for you in limited, especially, again, if you have the raid enablers. Stormfleet Sprinter. Okay, here's a raid enabler. This one's really easy. Haste 2/2 for 3. You're going to really enjoy playing this card, I think. It's an uncommon. You'll be able to see them every once in a while in a draft. But it does a couple things. Yes, it enables raid, like I said. But also, again, those pirates are trying to be a little more aggressive this time around. And aggro decks sometimes fall a little bit short. They run out of gas. This is a card that's not going to run out of gas as easily. Your opponent's going to actually have to destroy this one as opposed to put out a big blocker because it can't be blocked. So it can just get in there for 2 damage. It has haste, so it can do it immediately, which is kind of nice. And really surprise your opponent sometimes with maybe a follow-up raid play right off the bat if you have enough mana. So this is phenomenal. And I think it's actually good enough to see some standard play as well. If there's an aggressive deck looking for something like this, that's okay playing these colors. So maybe not in the next meta. We'll have to kind of see where things go. But definitely down the road, this is a card you don't want to forget about. Storm the Vault, which turns into Vault of Catlicon. This was one of the early cards that was previewed, and now that we've seen the rest of the set, card has a little more utility than it did at the beginning because of the Ascend mechanic. This is a way to build out your board state through treasure tokens, and now we know treasure tokens aren't just about color fixing and ramp, although they do that, or even working with like Revel in the Riches or some of those cards. They actually can also work towards Ascend, and there's a lot of cards that do get better with City's Blessing. So that makes this card a little more interesting than it was when we first saw it. So you want to keep that in mind. Now, if you do get 5 artifacts in play at your end step, you have to transform this. You don't have a choice. It becomes a Tolarian Academy, basically. It's a little better than Tolarian Academy because you can also tap it for 1 mana of any color, which is kind of good in case you run out of artifacts later, or you just need other colors. So that's pretty awesome. Card's amazing. I mean, Tolarian Academy is an amazing card, right? Now, the big question is, what do you do with all this mana? Because we saw Growing Rights of Itlimoc and Ixalan, and that card should have been amazing, right, by all means, but didn't really feel as incredible because we didn't really have anything to do with the mana that was consistent enough. So I think you're going to have the same problem here to a degree, at least right now, but maybe in the future, as more cards enter the standard environment, that could change. So this will be one to watch. So as far as limited goes, okay, you are paying for 2 different colors. However, you can actually attack in with creatures on that turn. If one can get by, then wonderful, you get a treasure token. Especially good if you have some evasive creatures. So it does work well with both pirates and even merfolk, basically, although it's a little off color for them with the red. But still, if you have good Ascend cards in your deck, this could be worth your trouble, quite honestly. Every once in a while, you might find something to do with the mana too later on. But even if you don't, there are enough payouts, I think, with Ascend to at least consider this card. Maybe it's not a super high draft pick necessarily, but maybe middle of the pack at worst in pack 1. Later on, you may pick it higher if you feel like you have a lot of Ascend going on already. What about Standard? Well, again, like Growing Rights, I don't know if there's a great payout for this right now. So I don't really see it in the next Standard coming up, but maybe in the future. The power level's there. There's definitely raw power behind this card. Commander, that's where this is going to shine, because Tolarian Academy is going to be fantastic in a Commander environment, right? So you do have to jump through a few hoops to get there, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be that difficult. Play a bunch of mana rocks or something, and then you play this, and basically at the end of your turn, flip it. You could be having a pretty good day there, and if you have some good spells to use the extra mana on, which you should in Commander, yeah, you could be making some huge plays. Angrith the Flame Chained. Okay, this is a Planeswalker that's really designed for aggro decks. Comes into play with 4 loyalty for 5, so that's okay. The +1, each opponent discards a card and loses 2 life. So what I like about that, first off, it is each opponent for multiplayer games. But what I like about this idea is if I'm trying to be aggressive decks a lot of times run out of gas. Now on turn 5, turn 6, I throw this down and maybe I can squeak out some more damage if my opponent puts down some big creatures. I can't get by anymore with my small, hasty creatures. So that's kind of the reason this card exists, I think. Also, too, the -3 ability is also very good for racing towards the end of an aggro game, right? Because I can take my opponent's best blocker, turn that against them, at least for a turn. If it's a smaller converted mana cost creature, 3 or less, I also get to sacrifice at the end of turn. So it can work as removal in some cases as well. In a pinch, you could give one of your own creatures haste, which could be good, even though it's not the obvious play. The -8 is awesome. Great way to finish off a game if you can get there, but it's going to be really hard to get there, honestly. That's not going to happen very often, so I wouldn't even really consider that too much. If it works out, wonderful, but you probably already were going to win the game. It is interesting, though, that it does work for all opponents yet again, so for multiplayer, definitely take that into account. The biggest issue I see with this, though, is it's not a card that easily protects itself. It doesn't make like a token or anything like that. It can sort of kind of temporarily protect itself with that -3, but unfortunately that's a big hit that it's taking to do it too, and it's probably going to put it in range where it's going to get knocked out anyway. So yeah, it's not a card that I see consistent enough for Standard, unfortunately. Even in an aggro deck, I feel like aggro decks would basically find better things to do at the 5 spot, whether that's other direct damage or something like that, that's a little less conditional. I like the fact that it strips your opponent's hands. It's great against control, but it's not great in all matchups, like aggro mirrors, for example. It's not going to do a whole lot for you, especially with this on the board telegraphing it. So it doesn't quite get there for me. I feel like it's just a little too weak, maybe not pushed enough for Standard. Great and limited, though. Like first pickable, even though it is 2 colors, I'm still going to first pick this in pack 1 because Planeswalkers are just amazing because of the extra value they give you. It doesn't matter what it does, honestly, most of the time. You're going to be happy to play these in draft and sealed, and they're going to do well for you, right? And finally, for Commander, again, this does have wide-ranging effects that do reach out to the whole table. So for that reason alone, I might be at least considering playing this or trying it out. Direfleet Neckbreaker. Okay, this is a fantastic aggro pirate. It costs 4. It's a 3/2. It's an orc pirate itself, but attacking pirates you control get +2/+0, which means it actually impacts itself. Attacking in is a 5/2. That's super sweet. So where do you go with this card in Limited? In draft, is it first pickable? It is. I mean, it is 2 different colors, and you're really planning on forcing pirates to some degree if you pick this up. That's not always the best idea. But if you're a big fan of the pirates or a big fan of aggro, you might do it anyway, and I think that's fine. Sometimes will still work out for you. This is better in pack 2 or 3 once you're already starting to go down that road to start picking these up when you can. But a couple of these in a deck could be super sweet. Granted, they will get picked up fast, though, because, again, there's 4 tribes, 8 people at the table. And this is a powerful card that people are going to be thinking about, even if they're lightly in pirates. Because you don't have to be all in on pirates for this to be good either. Having a handful, like what you'd find in a seal pool or something like that, is probably going to be good enough too. So keep that in mind as you go through. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing situation either with a card like this. So what about standard? So I did say earlier in the week that maybe we see a Rakdos aggro deck in the format, which is running at least some pirates. So if that's the case, this could get there. It's got its work cut out for it, though, because you do have Ramanap Red, which is already a very good deck out there. And you have some hosing cards, like we saw one in black the other day, which could hurt aggro a little bit. So maybe it's going to be a tough sell. But it's possible. I won't count it out yet by any means. Also, two commander players that have been trying to put together a good pirate deck. This is another piece to that. Alright, Journey into Eternity, which becomes Atzel Cave of Eternity. This card is super sweet. I've been alluding to this card a lot this week, saying there's some light reanimation in the set. Now, this is at rare. You're not going to see it all the time, but this is awesome reanimation. Only costs 3. It's in Golgari colors. You enchant one of your creatures. When that creature dies, it gets to come back, and this comes back transformed. And then, of course, you see this ability on here for a green, black, and 3, return target creature card from graveyard to the battlefield. So this makes it very problematic for your opponent to deal with your creatures. So you put it on your best thing. Eventually it dies. Hopefully it doesn't get exiled, but eventually it dies. It just comes right back, and this comes back, meaning next time it dies, it probably can come back again for 5 mana. That can be very problematic. Now, if they have a Naturalize or something, they do have some ways to defend against this, maybe for game 2 or game 3. But alone, this card is actually pretty interesting, and I feel like maybe this is foreshadowing for some potential future reanimation, maybe coming from Dominaria or something like that. Because the animation ability feels really light in the set, but it is very deliberate too. And there are some ways to pitch cards, and maybe the most famous way is Explore. This is great with Explore. As a matter of fact, Golgari Explorer, I think, is a backup archetype for you if you're drafting. Maybe your draft's not going so well. I would say look out for Azorius Flyers and Golgari Explorer, because I do think there's some backup ways to go if you can't get all in on one of the tribes. So overall, does this make it into standard? I don't think the pieces are all there yet. I mean, there's some amazing things you can reanimate. I mean, obviously in Limited, you could take advantage of that, some of the elder dinosaurs and such. But in standard right now, I don't know if it's quite there. I think it needs more pieces to be more consistent, but maybe we will get those pieces down the road. I kind of feel like we probably will. There are some good combos available, though, in standard, like Bane Whip Punisher, for example. Imagine playing this on the Punisher, sacking it to destroy a creature, only to have it come back, do it again, and then as the game goes on, you can bring it back with the cave and just repeat. Maybe that's not a deck, but it's a pretty good start. Commander, you're going to have a good time with this. A lot of crazy broken things you can probably do with this in Commander. Now, there's a lot of ways to already reanimate stuff in Commander, so do you need this? No, but it is a redundancy that could be fun. Jungle Creeper, great card here. 3/3 for 3, even though it is 2 different colors. Has a nice board presence behind it for limited, and when it dies, you can pay 5 to get it back into your hand, recast it. It's very hard to deal with. Your opponent's either going to have to exile it or just really pull ahead to get away from this card. So, yeah, very, very playable. Again, if you're in these colors, this will be a great pickup for you in a draft. I don't really think right now it sees standard play. Not to say it might not be able to see play in the future, depending on what kind of maybe self-mill reanimation deck gets out there, especially considering it's in these colors. But I don't know if that's going to be something we see in this next meta, maybe in the future. Raging Regisaur. Okay, this one is actually a great limited card if you're in Gruul. It's a 4/4 dinosaur. And when it attacks, it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. So you can hit a dinosaur you control for Enrage. You can hit one of these small 1 toughness creatures like the vampire we saw a little bit ago. Hose your opponent that way. Or you can simply mess up combat math by hitting their blocker that maybe is 5 toughness or something like that. Make them think about their decisions. Or, if nothing else, just hit them and get more damage across. So, great card for 4 mana. Very aggressive. You'll be happy to play this when you're in these colors. Better if you have dinosaurs with Enrage, but still good regardless. Now, does the Gruul Dinosaur deck play this? Maybe. It's a decent-sized body, and if Enrage is an important enough component to the new version of that deck, I wouldn't count this thing out, although there are a lot of great choices, so maybe it doesn't get there, but I would at least want to test it if nothing else. Path of Metal, which becomes Mezzali, Tower of Triumph. And this is a weird one. This card feels really strange to me. Here's where I play it, though, in Limited, if I have a lot of Enraged Dinosaurs, because it could ping my stuff. If it does transform, which is kind of weird, and it may or may not transform during the course of a game, the abilities are interesting for an aggro deck. That first ability is great to get more damage across after you put out some early damage, so that's kind of cool. Also note, this does deal with each opponent, so it's kind of cool for multiplayer. That other ability, the white and 2 ability, really weird. Choose a creature at random that's attacked this turn, destroy it. So it's high variance, and it does slow decks down, though. So if I only have one really good creature to attack in with, maybe I'm playing some sort of crazy reanimation plan, then it kind of slows me down quite a bit and shuts me down. What I really like about that second ability, though, is in multiplayer, it doesn't have to be an interaction you're in. Someone could attack someone else, and you could still activate this ability. And you don't have to do it during combat either. You could do it after combat's over. So if two people are kind of beating each other up, let them beat each other up, and then after that be like, okay, randomly get rid of one of your creatures. That's actually kind of cool. So I feel like this card shines the most in Commander just because of its weird interactions. Is it playable and limited, though? Yes. If you have Enraged Dinosaurs, it's playable. It's even playable maybe in some aggro builds, too, because of that other ability, as long as you feel like you can turn this thing with some relative ease. And it's really cheap, even though it is 2 colors, so it has that going for it. I don't really see this crossing over into Standard. It doesn't feel like it's focused enough for what's going on in Standard right now, but it's an interesting card. I like the design, if nothing else. Relentless Raptor, good 3/3 for 2, even though it is 2 different colors. It's a little weird because it has Vigilance, it has to attack and has to block. But you know what? For 2 mana early on, you can still find some true value in this card, especially if you're being aggressive or if you just need a dinosaur. And yeah, maybe it won't live all that long, but I think it's going to do some damage and leave its mark considering the low casting cost that you paid for it. In Standard, I don't think the dinosaur deck wants this necessarily, but if there's ever a Boros aggro deck in the meta, this could find a home there. It's Oaken Seer. This one's pretty easy. Mana Dorks are always good. This one does cost 3, 2 different colors, so you are thinking about maybe later game plays with this one. But it does give you mana of any color, and it's good with dinos too, because you can sack it to get a dino back from your graveyard to your hand later. Has a nice size to it too, 2/3, so it could actually get in and rumble maybe early on if you needed it to. So yeah, it's good early, it's good late, great pickup for you in a draft, especially if you're already in dinos, but you don't have to be because Mana Dorks are just always good. I don't really see this in Standard because I do think it's a little too expensive for it to matter as a Mana Dork. A Wildly Radiant Champion. Okay, I like this card. It's got a big glaring issue with it, which we'll talk about in a second, but I want to try this out because for 4 mana, if I have a number of creatures on the battlefield, and many times you will in Draft and Seal, then if I can +1 this and get this to the level where I can ultimate maybe the next turn or the turn after, that's going to be really, really good. And my opponent's going to have to try to stop that from happening at all costs, quite honestly. Now, here's the glaring problem with this card. The card is horrible if you don't have other creatures. So if you don't have many creatures on your side of the battlefield, you're behind for whatever reason, this is not going to catch you up. This is going to be a Planeswalker that really can do nothing of consequence, other than maybe absorb some damage for you if your opponent's worried about it or something. So that's super awkward. If you're behind, this isn't going to save you by any means. Also, it's hard to defend itself. I mean, it is relying on the fact you're running a lot of creatures. So to defend itself, I mean, it doesn't really have any ability like create a token or anything like that. It is truly relying on you building it up fast to get to that ultimate. That's really what it's all about. Now, the -1 is not horrible, again, if you have a lot of creatures, especially a creature with evasion. So maybe I have that merfolk that is unblockable and I can buff it and it can get in for some serious damage, something like that. It's actually kind of cool. But the casting cost colors require it to have some splashes going on if you're trying to focus on vampires or say merfolk, which is probably where this card would be best. She's got a dinosaur in the picture, but this isn't the best card for dinosaurs because they're tending to go a little taller than going wide. So it can be awkward, but am I still running it? Yeah, I'm still running it because the payout can be really, really good if everything kind of falls in line with my creature development. Now, Standard, this will not be able to make it in Standard, I'm afraid, just again because it is so dependent on board state and creatures. There's so many great removal spells and so many great board sweeps out there right now. I just can't imagine this could survive in the current meta. Interesting, though, for Commander, especially for token decks. Lesnia token decks, definitely a thing in that world, and this is a nice complement to them. Siege Horn Ceratops. Good 2-drop dinosaur. Again, it's 2 different colors, so adjust expectations a little bit, but the power level is super high here. Yes, it's fragile when it comes out, but you know what? You only pay 2 for it. If it gets blown out, it gets blown out. And if you can ping this thing with an Enrage Enabler, all of a sudden you got yourself a 4/4 on your hands. That's actually pretty good. If it becomes a 6/6, it's going to be really hard to deal with. Your opponent's going to have to find an answer for this, or they could be in trouble. So a little high risk, high reward. It could just get blown out right away. But if not, you didn't invest too much in it, and it could have some big plays down the road in the game. Madonnas Climb, which becomes Winged Temple of Araska. Awesome for Merfolk. Like, I think this is possible to see play in the standard Merfolk deck. because this does what Merfolk wants to do. It only costs 3, it's in the right colors, and then on top of that, at the beginning of combat, it activates, so you don't have to even wait till the next turn or something. It will interact this turn as long as you have a creature, and you get a +1/+1 counter on that creature. Now, you can go a couple ways with this. You could just pile the counters on and try to flip this as soon as possible, or you can spread the counters out a little bit to try to just grow your team. But once you get a third counter on something that you just placed a counter on, then at that point, it does have to transform. You don't have the choice. Once it transforms, that ability is quite good. Imagine using that maybe again on an unblockable Merfolk or something like that. Gives it flying. Sometimes that'll be enough, but if you have other means of evasion too, wonderful. It could be putting across some serious damage. So this feels excellent for Merfolk. So I do think this does see some standard play in that deck. A little awkward that it's legendary, but I think we can get past that. This isn't a 4 of, but maybe it's like a 2 of or something like that as you start to kind of play around and brew and try to figure out what the right number is. Aside from that, in Limited, this is actually very good for you in Limited too. Very reasonably costed. Even if you're not like super streamlined into Merfolk or anything like that, it doesn't have to be Merfolk. It can be any of your creatures, and I think the payouts are strong enough regardless of what you're doing, as long as you can swing the color cost, of course. Kumina, Tyrant of Araska. This one's a mythic, and this is a very good Merfolk. Now, we saw this foiled before the next card that we're going to see, so a lot of people were a little disappointed thinking, oh no, is this our Merfolk Lord? Because it's not a great Merfolk Lord, but it's a great Merfolk. Only costs 3, it's a 2/4, it's legendary, so you do have to keep that in mind. But tapping another Merfolk will make this unblockable, which is kind of nice because that's kind of what Merfolk are trying to do. But here's what's really interesting about the card. Tap 3 untapped Merfolk you control. This time it could be this one, and you get to draw a card. Or tap 5 untapped Merfolk you control. Again, it could be this one, and you get a +1/+1 counter on each Merfolk. So kind of like a Lord ability, but it sticks around. It's just harder to activate, of course. And it can actually grow upon itself, which is cool. So there's a lot happening here. Now, here's the trick. You don't just play those abilities outright. You wait to do those at the end of your opponent's turn so you don't put your defenses down, basically. You play it that way, pretty good card. This is a card that is going to be awesome for you if you're all in on Merfolk and draft for sure. But even if you're not, it's a good creature just on its own. Just being a 2/4 for 3 could be pretty decent in some like sealed decks and stuff like that too. So don't ignore the card if you're not in Merfolk, but it's going to really, really be great there. Even if you have a few Merfolk, it's going to be really, really great. Now, what about Standard? I do think it sees play in the Standard deck. Again, it's not a 4 of, maybe it's a 1 or 2 of, but I think there's enough utility here, especially with that card draw, that you could find some value in it, if nothing else. As for Modern, I don't know if this one gets there, because again, that deck is so streamlined. It doesn't really need a lot of new cards or a lot of updates to be great, and a lot of things that you would put in might just slow it down. You don't want to do that. I'd test one maybe, but I don't know if I see it there. Definitely Standard, though. Could be fun also, too, in Tribal Merfolk for Commander. Merfolk Mistbinder. Okay, here's the Merfolk Lord. This card's incredible. Let's talk about Limited first. Everything I said about the Vampire Lord pretty much just applies here for the Merfolk Lord. This is a great pickup if you're all in on Merfolk, obviously, but even if you're not, it's still a 2 casting cost 2/2. It is 2 different colors. But if you have just a few Merfolk in your deck, you're going to find value here for 2 mana, no doubt. So good in sealed pools, better in draft pools, probably, as long as your draft goes well anyway. So amazing card there. It's uncommon. You'll see them around, but they will get picked up quickly. So keep that in mind. Better chance of maybe getting them later on in pack 3 if you're lucky again. Now, what about Standard? Yes, this is the reason the Standard Merfolk deck exists, basically. If it wasn't for this card, I don't think that deck would get there. This card is pushing it over the top and makes it a contender. This will see play, obviously, in 4-ofs in those decks. Modern, I think it sees play there too. That Modern Merfolk deck that's using green now, which is something that came about thanks to Ixalan, I think that this easily just slides right into that deck. Makes it even more efficient, believe it or not. So that's kind of amazing. Like to see what happens with that deck in Modern once this set comes out, honestly. So, yeah, this is it. Glad to see this in the set. I think a lot of people would have been disappointed if this was not here. Zakama, Primal Calamity. Okay, I love the name of that card. Zakama, Primal Calamity. So this thing's a mythic, of course. Now, I got to point this out. First things first. When this enters battlefield, you can cast it, untap all lands you control. Whenever you have that ability, there are ways to make endless mana combos through bounce abilities. So keep that in mind. Just be aware of it. I mean, you see that in cubes a lot with some of the older cards that could untap your lands, stuff like that. So this can do that. So when you go into the world of Commander, for example, there are combos that can give you unlimited mana. And then you can take that mana to even pour into these abilities if you have nothing better to do with it. And you can destroy all the creatures on the board, gain a bunch of life, basically as much life as you want, destroy artifacts and enchantments. So there's a lot of outputs too in this card for that particular combo, right? Which is crazy. Now, aside from all that, let's talk about limited first. We should focus on limited. Can you even play this thing in limited? It's expensive. It costs 9, 3 different colors. Some decks might swing it, but not all decks. Here's the thing. If you have some good ramp behind you, maybe you have that Growing Rights of Ventlamok, there is a chance you might actually have a deck that can cast this. If you feel like there's a possibility of it, I'd say, hey, you know what? Go for it. That's what it's about. This is a game. It's about having fun. If you can make that work, you're going to be having a real good story to tell, right? Now, could get blown out by a removal spell, I guess. But if you can pull it off, it's going to be really sweet. And you know what? If it enters the battlefield, you still get to untap your stuff anyway. So you might have another play if it doesn't work out. So there you go. Now, another way this could see play in limited is, again, with some of the reanimation. Like if you get the Golgari card we saw a few moments ago. Yes, it's another color to bring into it, but it does allow you to perhaps dump this in the graveyard through some means and then bring it back. That's kind of cool too. So there are possibilities, but a lot of decks won't be able to swing this. So don't overextend yourself. If you end up in a situation where you can't play it, unfortunately, you probably just can't play it. You may have a better build that is just not even trying to touch this thing, and you just have to go for that when you have it, right? Is what it is. Standard. Does this see standard play? Again, if it did, it would have to be a reanimation deck. I don't think that deck's there yet, but I do think it could be there in the future. So this is one to watch. If it comes about earlier, I'll be a little surprised, pleasantly surprised, but I think it's going to be maybe after Dominaria comes out that we might have more pieces to something like that. We'll have to kind of wait and see. Commander, I mentioned, yeah, awesome card in Commanders. Could be your commander. It could be a lot of fun to mess around with this and try to create a combo. Even if you're not comboing off with this thing, it's still a 9/9 Vigilance, Reach, Trample with all these abilities attached to it. Kind of sweet. So, yeah, this card's really awesome, but it probably shines most in Commander, definitely at this point. But, yeah, I'd at least want to try it out. Seems like it could be really cool to play with other dinosaurs, too, in that type of deck. Awakened Amalgam. This is a artifact creature I'm not very excited about. Like, for casting cost, power and toughness based on different types of lands that I have, different names of lands. So obviously you're rewarded for playing more colors and some non-basics, but really at what point is this worth 4 mana, right? Like if you happen to play 4 different types of basic lands and play this on turn 4, you get a 4/4, well that's good, but how often is that happening, right? And then beyond that, yeah, maybe if you play long enough with some non-basics, this becomes like, I don't know, 4/4, 5/5, even a 6/6 if you're super lucky, but at what point in the game does that happen? And it doesn't have evasion or anything, so what are you doing with this thing, honestly? And then it's just going to get shattered anyway or naturalized. So there you go. I'm not playing this. I'm just not touching this one. Even if my pool is pretty dry, I'm going to be really hard pressed to play this. Azor's Gateway, which becomes Sanctum of the Sun. Here's another one of these big ramp cards. I mentioned it before. These are cool, but then again, what do you ramp to? You have to have a target. And this gives you a bunch of mana, but it is all of one of the 5 colors you choose, so you can't mix and match colors. But still, that's still pretty awesome. Problem is, how do you get there? Well, it's not so easy to get there. I mean, you have to play this for 2 and then tap and pay 1, draw a card, exile a card, and then you have to have cards with 5 or more different converted mana costs to exile this and flip it. You also gain 5 life, but they probably just give you the 5 life because they figure you're probably almost dead at that point. So, now here's the thing with the card. Is that unplayable? No, because in limited, sometimes rummaging is just good. This is kind of like a rummage. Unfortunately, it doesn't go into your graveyard to exploit some of these graveyard effects, but it does still let you get card selection. So if you're in an aggro deck, for example, and you don't want to hit too many land drops, this is a good way to like filter through your lands and such. So this is very playable in certain builds, but don't anticipate you're going to trigger this to transform and cast something huge. Probably not going to happen more often than not. It's probably more about the small little bit of advantage you get from the rummaging style mechanic that's on here. And that's kind of it. Other than that, standard, again, it's just too difficult. And again, even that rummaging mechanic isn't going to save it there. Commander, yeah, I might mess around with it there. If you have a chance of flipping it and doing something cool with it, it's probably going to be in Commander more than anywhere. And it's probably where this card would be the best. So something to think about there. But yeah, it's an interesting design card, if nothing else. I kind of like it. I'm glad they made it. And it's probably going to be fun in Commander. But yeah, it doesn't have huge utility necessarily when it comes to draft, sealed, or standard. Captain's Hook. This is an okay limited card for an aggro deck. Like, it's not super exciting because it costs 3, but that equip cost is cheap. And as we've seen, there's a lot of aggressive cards in this set that you can complement with some from Ixalan. So giving something +2/+0, like maybe you have that pirate in play that's already going to make the attacking pirate get another +2/+0. So between this and that, now you're attacking it with +4/+0 with menace. That's cool. And if it becomes unattached, the permanent's destroyed. So top-down design, right? There's no other reason really. I mean, a lot of times that won't come into play, but sometimes it will matter, of course. And like I said, cheap to equip. Yeah, I'm going to play this at least a lot of the time when I'm in a more aggressive build. I could see myself being fine with it. It's a rare. You won't see it all that often, but it will fit into that build. As far as standard goes, again, yeah, a little too expensive for what it's doing, a little too contingent on board state. Gleaming Barrier. This is a good sign that they are trying to slow down the limited game a little bit. One of the complaints about the first Ixalan Limited was the fact that it was too fast. Like, you had these tribes and you were trying to build these up for these great moments, but you ended up just in a race all the time anyway, so those great moments never kind of happened. So, yeah, there were some issues there, but this is an indication maybe they're trying to slow the game down a little bit. This is at common. It's going to muck up the ground, slow down the races, allow you to play some bigger strategies, and I think that's actually pretty cool. Also, too, when it finally does go away, you get yourself a treasure token, so hey, that's good too. That can be very relevant for gameplay. This card is obviously 4 limited, but I'm glad it exists. Golden Guardian, which turns into Gold Forge Garrison. This is interesting. I actually like this card more now that I've seen the full set than I did when I first saw this previewed. Because when I first saw it previewed, I was kind of like, okay, it's a 4/4 for 4. I might play this if I'm trying to gum up the ground, and it's still a little mid-rangey, so I still took a lot of damage from aggro in the first few turns, but maybe this helps me stabilize. Other than that, I might not play it. That was kind of my thought originally. But now that I know that Naturalize and Shatter are in the environment, I'm a little more interested. Still a little awkward because I got to pay 2 and have it fight one of my own creatures, but now what I could do is just have it fight like a 1/1 or something like that, and then Shatter or Naturalize it, and now I get the land. And making a 4/4 golem every turn, perhaps, is pretty good. So I'm all for it. Does it require a little bit of setup? Sure it does. Maybe a little too much sometimes if you're against an aggro deck. But at least this, in the meantime, slows down the aggro deck. And I do like that. So yeah, I'd try this thing out. Again, if I don't have Shatters, Naturalizes to kind of back it up a little bit, then I'm probably not going to play with it. But yeah, if I have that as a backup, I might try it. I might go for it. Seems like it could be interesting. And in the perfect world, too, once I do flip it and start making 4/4 golems, if I still haven't won the game for some reason, maybe it helps me get City's Blessing. Oraska Relic. It's a mana rock, and yeah, once you get the City's Blessing, you can sacrifice it to gain life and, more importantly, draw a card, so I do like that. But the problem is, early on, it's not super exciting because it's not giving you like a mana of a certain color or anything like that. It's colorless. If you're in the market to ramp, though, it's a fine mana rock, and if you do think later you're going to hit the City's Blessing, it's great later because you can change it out for a card once you no longer need the mana. And I do like that utility. That's pretty good. Not always going to make your build at 3, but there are some decks that will play this and be fine with it. Silent Gravestone. All right, here's some graveyard hate. Another card in a number of cards in this set that are answers to potential problems. Good job, Wizards. We have not been seeing enough of this, and that's what was wrong with Standard for so long. I mean, just real quick, don't want to get too far off subject here, but cards like Shatter and Naturalize, we used to see those cards all the time up until the Tarkir block, and then all of a sudden they just went away, and look what happens to Standard during that time. When you don't produce the answers to the problems, things get out of control, things get overpowered, people can't deal with decks, everything becomes very one-sided. So this is a fantastic step in the right direction. Great to see a card like this in the set. So what is it doing for you? Well, for Draft or Sealed, it is going to simply be a sideboard card. You bring this in if your opponent is interacting too much with the graveyard. It doesn't have to be like reanimation necessarily. It could just simply be they have a couple recovers in their deck. This is good enough to maybe hose some of that a little bit, and that's kind of nice. So bring it in when you need it. Standard, this is a good sideboard card. It actually does mess up things like Godfarrow's Gift. It messes up the Scarab God a little bit too. So there are actual practical things today that you could use this for in Standard, and because of that, yes, I think this is easily a sideboard card in a lot of decks. Outside of Standard, we have better options. I really like Rest in Peace. I really like Relic of Progenitus. So I don't feel like this is going to take the place of some of those cards or anything like that in Modern or Legacy or anything, but glad this exists in the world of Standard, and sometimes you'll be happy to have it in Limited too. Strider Harness. It's not super exciting. I don't have a lot of stuff to say about this card. Basically, it's not unplayable if you're trying to be a little more aggressive, but I think you rarely have this make your deck. If I'm in an aggressive deck, I'd probably just rather have a new creature as a 3-drop as opposed to trying to buff something that's already existing with equipment. So yeah, nothing super exciting about this one. The Immortal Sun. As we go from maybe one of the worst cards in the set to maybe one of the best cards in the set. This mythic is nuts. Okay, it costs 6, so it's not cheap. Nice mid-rangey card, but at least it doesn't have any color requirements. But you play this, the only thing that could hose you is if you're trying to play Planeswalker, I guess. But you're probably very lucky if you open a Planeswalker and this in the same pool, right? It's probably not very often. But here's what it does for you. Shuts off opponents' potential Planeswalkers and gives you an extra card at your draw step. And your spells cost 1 less to cast. And it's an Anthem effect. What? Right? This card's insane. So yes, I play this in Limited. I don't care what deck you're in. Something's going to help you here, right? And card draw itself, I mean, this is worth playing probably just if it said the card draw. You had me to draw the extra card, honestly. I probably would have tried to play this card without anything else on it. It is a little awkward being legendary, of course, when you start talking about constructed formats. But I still think it gets there. I still think you see this show up in some decks. And I'm not 100% sure which decks can afford to work it in yet. Because you do have to think about, of course, Planeswalkers. If you're running decks that want to use Planeswalkers, that could be a problem for you. So I do think it does see standard play. Maybe it's out of sideboards to deal with Chandra, to deal with Vraska, perhaps. But I think this card is good enough to just randomly see play in any deck that feels like it can swing that casting cost. So maybe some light ramp behind it could get you there faster or make you feel like you're not losing the turn necessarily when you do play it completely. But yeah. This card's amazing. Awesome in Commander, too. I don't think I need to say that. This is going to be tremendous in that format. Really, really strong card here. Traveler's Amulet. Okay, this is a reprint. We saw this most recently in Hour of Devastation, so this is a card that shows up every once in a while. Really to help your limited game if you're trying to fix your colors, make sure you hit your land drops. It's a good card. You'll be happy to play this, especially if you're getting a little bit greedier, splashing some colors, maybe going deeper into a third color. Arch of Vraska. This is a card that isn't amazing, but I can see myself playing it in certain decks. Basically, tapping 5 and this to draw a card only when I have the City's Blessing feels like a lot. But here's the thing. If I can make this part of my mana base comfortably, I'll just play this part of my mana base, and every once in a while I'm going to hit off it. Won't happen all the time, but if it does, wonderful. So what I mean by that is, if I'm playing a monocolor deck, or if I'm playing a 2-color, maybe 50-50 deck, I can put this in my mana base, and I'm going to be just fine. Now, if I'm going deeper in color, splashing a color, or maybe going deeper into a third color, then I don't want to make this part of my mana base because it will ruin my consistency, and that actually is a big problem. If I still want to run the card for some reason, it has to take up a spell spot, and I don't really see that happening 99.9% of the time. So that's where I don't play the card. So a lot of people do see these, and they kind of say, well, you know, what's the harm? It's still giving me mana. If it works out, it works out. If it doesn't, it doesn't. It still lands. But don't underestimate how important your color consistency is, especially when you're getting greedy. So you don't want a card like this to come up or be in your opening hand when you need to cast your stuff on color. That could be an issue for you. So it's not a bad card, but just play it when it makes sense to play it, in other words. Because every once in a while, that extra card draw at the end of your opponent's turn is going to be a big deal for you. But you have to kind of get there. Probably going to be better in a long, kind of stalled out game or something like that. Not great in every game. But again, if you can put it in without much of an issue for your deck's consistency, go for it. The same is even true in Standard. Standard decks that have really consistent mana bases, they might be able to get away with this. If they can't get away with it, they won't run it. Evolving Wilds. Again, here for the limited game more than anything, this is a great way to just kind of search up the right basic lands you need to fix your colors and such. It's nice when these exist. Of course, this has been reprinted many times. And we get this cycle of lands. They all come into play tab. This is Forsaken Sanctuary, Foul Orchard, Highland Lake, Stone Quarry, Woodland Stream. Now, actually, if you have Blood Sun, they don't come into play tapped. How about that? But most of the time these come into play tapped. Again, they're here to help you with your consistency by giving you some dual color options out of your lands. They're not anything crazy. You'll be happy to have them, though, when you need them for your limited game. And then finally, of course, you get your basic lands. Yeah, they're pretty good, too. Island's probably the best of the bunch. All right, with that being said, that's the set. We made it. So thank you if you stuck with us through the whole set review. I'm looking forward to this set. I think it's going to be a lot of fun in Limited. I think we're going to have a better Limited experience in Ixalan. I didn't hate Ixalan personally, but I understand some of the critique around that set and some of the issues that were there. And I think this one will be a little bit better, so we'll have to kind of wait and see. I'm still very excited for Dominaria too, which is down the road, but I think a lot of people might sit out this set and wait for Dominaria, but I'm looking forward to playing it. And we're going to be doing another video tomorrow where we talk about the pre-release. So it's really for maybe players who've never gone to a pre-release, what you need to know, what you can expect, what you should bring, that type of thing. And then we have a couple Market Watch videos also coming up later in the week, so stay tuned for those. Until next time, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like, subscribe, have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.